In the autumn of 1347, the Mediterranean breeze carried more than the scent of salt and spice to the Sicilian shores. It whispered death. Ships unassuming and laden with plague creaked into port, their hulls teeming with rats and fleas, carriers of an unseen curse. Soon the island's bustling markets stilled, laughter fell silent. Entire towns withered under an unrelenting pestilence that crept through the air and travelled by touch. People watched in bewilderment as life unravelled before them, a tapestry torn by invisible hands. The Black Death had arrived, a shadow poised to reshape Europe's fate forever. Step with me into the shadowed ports of 1347, where history shifts on a silent tide. In the haze of a Sicilian autumn, a new chapter unfolds, a tale of destiny woven by unforeseen hands. Here, amid the bustling docks of Messina, Genoese trading ships sail in, bearing Byzantine silks, spices, and a silent, insidious calamity. Among the crates and bales, the fleet-footed, fur-bearing cargo of rats spreads unseen. Their tiny bodies teem with fleas, minuscule merchants of doom that will reshape Europe. Barely have the ships moored when the silent menace blooms. Sailors, once robust, now lie feverish and speckled with buboes beneath their skin, marked as the plague's inaugural victims, felled not by war's blade, but by the stealthy press of a flea. As they disembark, greeting loved ones and townsfolk, they unknowingly sow chaos. The plague whispers among them, a ghostly hand spreading through touch, breaths, and even the soft sighs of sleep, turning vibrant homes into gatherings of the dead. Here in Sicily, the plague moves like a rumour at dusk, altering life's fabric without warning. It spreads, not with the clamorous advance of an army, but with chilling silence, offering no quarter. Market squares once bustling with barter fall quiet, as the sick and well alike face the unstoppable. Winter's chill settles over the land, turning thriving towns into mourning grounds, filled with the mournful toll of church bells. Fields go untended, nature reclaiming what humanity surrenders to fate's spectre. Whispers of divine anger circulate, cries for mercy rise, and the people, caught in a nightmare they did not dream, are left to ponder their supposed sins. In the grip of such devastation, even reason falters. Learned and laymen alike turn to the supernatural. Clerics preach of celestial retribution. Scholars gaze heavenward for omens. Whispers of curses and conspiracies spark fear. Stories of witches and poisoned wells ignite paranoia, each tale offering a fleeting balm, a desperate reach for meaning amidst chaos. Yet still, daily life unravels grotesquely. Routines once familiar swallowed by dread. The air thickens with uncertainty, and the act of waking becomes heavy with finality. Doors remain closed, streets deserted, except by shadows of loss. Life's rituals crumble. Weddings, feasts, and church gatherings fade into risks too great to bear, their jubilant noise replaced with an ominous hush. Marketplaces, once vibrant, now bear witness to fear's dominion. Inside homes, isolation becomes a shield, albeit a frail one, against the plague's relentless march. Forged by desperation, countermeasures emerge, a patchwork of endeavours, profound and futile. Perfumed citizens stroll, believing in sense as protection against corruption. Physicians bleed and purge, clinging to time-worn doctrines, while communities stiffly enforce quarantines. Fear inspires flagellants in doleful processions, offering themselves in expiation. Meanwhile, the true carriers of chaos, rats and fleas, navigate unnoticed. These erstwhile pests, hidden within cityscapes, embody the silent threat. Rats stow away on board ships, casting rats into towns where they mingle invisibly with humans. Fleas leap, transferring their deadly cargo to human hosts, turning simple bites into sinister harbingers of death. The unwitting dance between flea, rat, and human unfolds, a ballet of destruction unseen by medieval eyes. Death, cold and impartial, knows no social bounds. It infiltrates the opulent halls of nobility and the meagre abodes of the peasantry alike. In roasting halls, nobility's feasts grow dim with fear, titles offering no sanctuary from the indiscriminate reach of plague. Peasants find no solace in sparse quarters. Fate's hand blurs the line between caregiver and future victim, enforcing equality through shared suffering. As towns succumb, a palpable stillness ensues. Disrupted streets lay silent. Once lively squares are haunts of memory. The acrid scent of decay lingers, echoing absence more resoundingly than sound itself. The wind carries whispers through empty facades, sealing towns in ghostly quiet. A lament for what's lost, a dirge for community dissolved. In hushed voids, the ever-present burden of loss is etched into the landscape, a mourner's monument to vanished vibrancy. From this silence, some seek knowledge, a beacon against the encroaching void. Surviving monks and scholars, conduits of fading wisdom, strive to record chaos in dusty tomes, bridging the gap between despair and comprehension. Though sometimes faltering, caught between hope's possibility and resignation, the quest for understanding continues, a resistance against the abyssal tide. As plague's grip weakens, the aftermath reveals not just remnants, but a flicker of rebirth. The survivors, though shrouded in grief's lingering shadow, plant seeds of resilience. Society tentatively steps back, laying groundwork for a future no longer burdened by history's harshest lessons. The darkness gives way to a cautious awakening. Life, redefined by loss, gleams with potential. With death's grim lessons heeded, exploration and innovation bloom. Europe takes tentative steps toward the dawn of Renaissance, sculpting a new chapter from the ruins of an old world. In medieval Europe, urban centres became unwitting arenas for disaster. The Black Death found its perfect match in these crowded, bustling environments, where people lived practically on top of one another. Amid narrow alleyways and vibrant markets, merchants peddled their goods, unaware they were facilitating a swift and deadly contagion. Homes bulged with families, personal space a distant luxury, and hygiene, at least by today's standards, was shockingly absent. This chaotic tapestry of medieval city life, rich with the smells of livestock and smoke, and the all-too-familiar scent of unwashed bodies, became a breeding ground for rats and fleas, vectors of the unspeakable scourge. Residents roamed, blissfully unaware that death hung invisibly in the air they breathed. As the city awoke each day, life surged into its habitual patterns, yet beneath its familiar rhythm lay imminent peril. Citizens pressed into workspaces and marketplaces, oblivious to the invisible agent of their doom. Ignorant of germs, people conjured theories of poison, celestial curses, and wrathful deities. When death tolls soared, fear fed desperate, often bizarre, attempts to stem the tide. The drone of daily life, once vibrant with human activity, dulled to near silence as neighbourhoods succumbed to plague's relentless advance, creating a stark and chilling emptiness. Medieval cities, their infrastructures already groaning under population pressures, had no answers for the torrent of illness. Open sewers overflowed in streets, diseased refuse stacking in heaps. the skeletal frameworks of public service swiftly collapsed, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of the dead and dying. Tradesmen, cornerstones of city life, were either claimed by disease or fled in fear, their vital roles unfilled, enabling chaos to fester. Veritable jungles of tanners and butchers left carcasses that enticed further pestilence, sealing cities' fates as plague's harrowing playground. Social order disintegrated as rapidly as the physical structures. Rich and poor faced the same bleak prospects as streets faded from lively commerce to haunting barrens. With law enforcement crippled by disease and fleeing officials, malfeasance ran unchecked. Opportunists seized the chaos, their exploits encouraged by the scarce presence of guards whose patrols were now memories of a more orderly time. Fear unravelled the threads of communal trust. Acts driven by survival betrayed neighbours, not bound by morality or custom. Scapegoats were fabricated, courting conspiracies spun from shadows of fear, reflecting the degree to which all sense of community and order had been eroded. Even the well-meaning shepherds of health and morality, medical practitioners and clergymen, stood powerless. Physicians, lacking effective treatments against an unyielding foe, found themselves sidelined as their efforts often led to self-infection. Some fled in futile hope of dodging doom, leaving a skeletal framework of folk healers who patched what wounds they could with homespun remedies and hopeful charms. Spiritual guides too, fatigued by relentless demand and unending death, found faith and ritual's cold comfort against an indifferent killer. Their ancient roles as comforters were fracturing, their absence or failures eliciting crisis in faith among their flocks. The social rituals once anchored to community life, weddings, feasts, funerals and celebrations, withered under plague's suffocating grip. Sound and merriment once rife at public gatherings were muted by fear. Even joyous revelry turned sombre or disappeared altogether. Community-level ceremonies where alliances formed across tables laden with bounty stalled, leaving voids in social calendars and isolating individuals in shared silence. Civil exchange dwindled as proximity equaled peril, such that shared meals or mere visits seemed too great a risk, steeped in suspicion and dread. Economically, the wheels of medieval commerce ground to a stop as merchants perished or stayed cautiously home, and ports resembling ghostly harbours closed against quarantine threats. The agile networks of trade and craftsmanship languished, their artisans and apprentices succumbing without replacements, transforming previously bustling marketplaces into eerie echoes. The waning economic activities forced survivors into novel negotiations, emboldening labourers with leverage as employers clamoured to fill now critical vacancies, a shift as surprising as it was inevitable. Through all this upheaval, a collapse of rigid social hierarchy unfolded. Nobles, adept traders, and common citizens alike saw the levelling effects of a disease heedless of status or wealth. Those who endured recognised a crumbling feudal order and began to redefine expectations, expanding class boundaries born from desperate innovation. Little by little, these new ambitions rewove the societal fabric, a process imperceptible amid immediate tragedy, yet relentless in its progress. Paradoxically, as cultural touchstones fell away, art, theatre, music, the seeds of another burst from their ruins. The decayed norms gave way to inventive emergence, echoed in peculiar collective acts designed to substitute connectivity. In the wake of decay, the resolute pulse of human spirit persisted. Cities, once ravaged, became resilience embodied, new interpretations of life, and communal frameworks sprouting from destruction, a phoenix-like rebirth amid devastation's ashes. defying plague's claim over history's narrative. The Black Death swept across Europe, leaving in its wake a grim toll no one had envisioned. Towns that once bustled with life stood silent, their streets emptied, society unrecognisable. Historians estimate between 30 and 60% of Europe's population perished, with some regions reaching staggering mortality rates of up to 80%. Entire villages vanished, their inhabitants erased not only from the map but from living memory itself. The numbers, no matter how staggering, fell short of conveying the profound human cost. Local chroniclers struggled to document the overwhelming scale, their records buckling under the sheer volume of death. Across the continent, deserted fields and collapsing structures served silent testament to lives once vibrant and intertwined with the land. The echo of the plague was felt far and wide. No longer thrumming with life, the economic heartbeat of medieval Europe, the village, found itself disrupted. Fewer hands tilled the soil, fewer voices filled the air. The result was a vacuum where there once was productivity, threatening food shortages, and the very fabric of societal stability. In these bleak times, the wealth of a nation, rooted in its people's labour and presence, found itself hollowed out. The demographic collapse set in motion shifts that transformed social and economic practices, echoing through generations. Communities that once thrived became ghostly evidence of nature's unyielding power. Abandoned homes grew weary under the weight of neglect, and nobility returned to empty estates. The nobility brought low by absence and loss. Yet the cities fared no better. As bustling hubs of medieval life, their transformation into pathways for death was both swift and horrifying. Narrow streets became channels for the pestilence, claiming rich and poor, young and old alike. Social structures crumbled, physical decay mirrored by social chaos. With leaders falling to disease and withered markets, the vibrant tapestry of city life unravelled. Fear fractured bonds of kinship and friendship, snapping threads left and right. Archaeological records today tell stories of disruption, hinting at the abrupt disruption, followed by long, arduous recovery. But it was not merely physical spaces that the plague left barren. It left a world redefined by absence. Homes stood empty, and survivors faced a life devoid of familiar faces. Taverns echoed with memories, churches held fewer voices in prayer, and funerals gave way to a silence that bled into community gatherings. For those who remained, the absence begged for meaning in a senseless world. Some turned to visions of divine retribution, seeing the plague as a test of faith or a punishment for collective transgressions. Religious radicals appeared, seeking out different paths or succumbing to new superstitions. In search of comfort, communities had to adapt swiftly, faced with the loss of generational knowledge. Farming techniques or trade secrets disappeared with those who had held them dear, leaving survivors to scramble for continuity. The transformation was cultural as well as practical, with mourning becoming introspective, questioning life's continuity. Fear, too, became a companion, entwining silence with streets once alive with sound. The disease seemed to strike at random, turning vibrant public spaces into enclaves of tension and mistrust. This fear grew palpably, shaping interaction, pushing survivors into their homes. Psychological isolation set in, with once welcoming communities growing wary of strangers, every cough a portent, each passerby a potential threat. The resulting paranoia shaped new group identities, where solidarity and survival reshaped concepts of belonging and community. The stench of death marched alongside the disease, merging with the very air. Cities became congested with the dead, carts lumbering through streets saturated with rot. Fragrant herbs and aromatic oils were burned in desperate attempts to mask the odour, but it proved as stubborn as the disease itself. The haunting smell perpetuated a constant reminder of mortality's relentless grip. Scholars would later describe cities heralded by smell, carrying tales of collective decay embedded in the aroma. The living grappled with logistics as the dead continued to mount. Cities creaked under the numbers, graveyards overflowed, and mass graves swallowed hundreds at a time. It became not just a physical challenge, but an emotional war. Every mass burial a reminder of the limits of human institutions. The continuing aftermath forced society's hand, reshaping institutions forever in the shadow of unfathomable mortality. Finally, the Black Death marched unrelenting, sweeping over boundaries and crossing mountains. Ships, merchants and roads all unintentionally spread the plague's reach, unruly and unstoppable. People's responses ranged from futile desperation to adapting, finding new unity amid chaos, as survivors sought to cleanse and protect their communities by any means. Even in destruction, hope stayed alive, a thread woven through the despair, illuminating paths to future resilience and renewal. Amid these early struggles lay the seeds for change. As the flames of the Black Death dimmed, the memories endured, indelibly marking Europe's history. Age-old structures reeled under the strain, but out of ruin, new thoughts emerged. In a testament to human endurance and adaptability, the same disasters that fractured society forged the Renaissance's bright dawn. The medieval church, once a towering bastion of hope and salvation in Europe, found its formidable facade crumbling under the relentless assault of the Black Death. For centuries, the church stood as the cornerstone of European life, providing answers and solace amid life's mysteries. But as the plague ravaged towns, its promise of divine protection shattered. People flocked to their clergy, praying fervently, lighting candles and attending Mass with desperation staining their pleas. It was less about salvation than seeking control in chaos. Yet the church, like its flock, was helpless. Clergymen died as swiftly as their congregants, and entire monastic communities vanished, casting skepticism into the very bedrock of their faith. With its authority eroding, the church faced an existential crisis. Without answers for God's wrathful silence, people turned to alternative narratives, unsettling the religious and social fabric of medieval Europe. A peculiar phenomenon, the rise of the flagellants took hold amidst this spiritual vacuum. Bands of penitents marched through towns, publicly whipping themselves, hoping to mirror Christ's suffering and earn divine mercy. Their grisly processions, mesmerizing and macabre, drew crowds desperate for salvation. The church, however, saw in them a challenge to its authority, dismissing their rituals as bordering on heretical. Yet, the flagellants' popularity revealed cracks in the church's armour, signalling a shift towards personal piety over hierarchy. As these grassroots movements swelled, the church resorted to its formidable inquisitorial forces to stifle dissent and reclaim control. Mistrust and fear birthed countless heretical whispers, each offering alternative explanations for the plague. Was it divine punishment, an apocalyptic omen, or the devil's work? These questions buzzed through villages, sowing seeds of rebellion. Inquisitors, with grim efficiency, targeted these gatherings, suppressing deviations from accepted doctrine. Public burnings and forced confessions starkly reminded all of the church's desperation to quash doubts that sprouted like wild weeds across Europe. In a world slipping into chaos, communities sought scapegoats. Witch hunts erupted with terrifying speed, targeting women at the margins of society, healers, midwives, as conduits of malevolence. Accusations spread like wildfire, and society exacted its fears upon these victims through brutal trials and executions. It was a distressing echo of the flagellant fervour, a misplaced catharsis seeking to impose order on disorder. Meanwhile, Jewish communities also face vicious persecution, scapegoated as alleged architects of the plague. Rumours accused them of well poisoning and demonic pacts, and in the ensuing frenzy, entire villages were massacred or expelled. The church's muted response underscored its failing influence, unable to quell the basest instincts of its adherents. This breakdown of authority seeped into religious practices, fraying rituals and traditions. With clergy dying as swiftly as laity, sacramental rites fell by the wayside, replaced by hasty burials in mass graves. Lay people assumed roles they never imagined. Funerals morphed into creative, pagan-influenced ceremonies, unsettling church officials, but organically responding to spiritual needs. This informal syncretism cracked the church's foundational structure as faith adapted to survival. Amidst this decay, the miasma theory arose, personifying the plague as foul air. Odours from the diseased, sickly sweet and suffocating, seemed to affirm divine wrath. Yet this dread of miasma inadvertently nurtured rudimentary public health measures, like avoiding tainted meats and purifying air with herbs. It was a small, uncanny turn toward logic over dogma. Though slow to act, the church eventually played a practical role, embracing rudimentary quarantine measures. Driven by a desire to protect sacred spaces from contamination, they imposed restrictions on gatherings. These measures paradoxically fostered a union between ecclesiastical concern and pragmatic survival, ensuring communities endured amid a pestilential siege. Survival, however, sparked an evolution in faith and creativity. New sacral works emerged from the devastation, reflecting the precarious duality of life and death. Artists and poets interpreted divine themes within human suffering, creating music and art that deeply resonated with a grief-stricken society. These works, bridging the divine and human experience, allowed communities to process loss and find catharsis in tragedy. Altarpieces, sculptures, and devotional art flourished, symbolising a newfound connection between earthly reality and spiritual aspiration. The Pope's temporal authority faced challenges beyond the confines of Christendom. Besieged by social dysfunction, Pope Clement VI and others struggled to maintain stability and forestall the Church's impending disintegration. Messages urged clergy to minister to the suffering, while papal decrees increasingly focused on temporal matters. Properties were sold, tithes requested with increasing urgency, as the papal court manoeuvred to maintain power and legitimacy. Even as the plague waned, the Church bore the scars of its shattered authority. While the institutional edifice endured, its spiritual core was irrevocably altered. Pilgrims no longer journeyed for divine allegories with the same fervour and authority once unwaveringly seated within the Church's realm, subtly shifted. Instead of dogma, a hard-won wisdom began to emerge, pushing the Church towards an uncertain future, forever marked by its failure to withstand the cataclysm of the Black Death. The Black Death, an indiscriminate harvester of lives, left Europe reeling in its wake, tearing through towns and fields. and leaving them eerily silent. Once vibrant communities stood ghostly and abandoned, their bustling life reduced to whispers of the past. Amidst the chilling desolation, a realization dawned. There was a dire shortage of that most basic of resources, human life. Unlike the nobles or the clergy, cocooned in the remnants of their wealth and influence, the common peasant emerged with a newfound power. With the scarcity of manpower rendering peasants into an essential part of survival, tables began to turn. Peasants previously tethered to the land and their lords found themselves in a rare position of leverage. They could now demand better wages, improved conditions, and even the freedom to choose their workplace. The very idea of a free peasant, once as fantastical as dragons or sorcery, began to unravel the feudal tapestry of obligation that had governed for generations. Communities, now craving fresh hands to till their fields and revive their towns, found themselves courting labourers, flipping the script on traditional class dynamics. The economic shift was not just in currency, but seismic, laying early foundations for a burgeoning class awareness among the working poor. Serfdom, a system that bound peasants to their lords as tightly as the vines that strangled ancient castles, started to crumble. The plague's devastation left estates and manors unguided, weakening the rigid hierarchies. Seizing the opportunity, many serfs fled in search of freer lives in the growing towns and cities, where anonymity and opportunity lay at every cobblestone corner. The new paths to freedom weren't without their conflicts. Landowners fought back with harsh tactics, trying to enforce old laws binding serfs to their former tasks and wages. However, enforcement faltered as communities disappeared, swallowed by time and countryside. With labour now a scarce and valuable commodity, the fine art of negotiation found new life. Landlords faced a surreal scenario of fields unsown, not for lack of fertile land, but for lack of willing hands without fair compensation. Peasants began demanding more than mere survival rations. They hungered for wages paid in coin, and conditions that echoed respect rather than duty. This turn of events, a revolutionary shift in the very air and soil of medieval society, saw peasant labour hawked like a prized lamb at market, landlords competing to secure essential hands. The allure of city life beckoned to the rural population, like a distant, shimmering mirage of newfound freedom. As cities recovered from their plague-stricken haze, they drew in waves of rural labourers and former serfs, eager to grasp fresh opportunities. The urban heartbeat thrummed with potential. Merchants, guilds and artisans offered more than just daily bread, but the promise of mastering trades and exploring new skills. In these bustling hubs, peasants could shed old shackles and cloak themselves in the roles of craftsmen, traders or citizens. The blurring of class distinctions, however slight, allowed many to envisage a future centred on potential rather than mere survival. In this transformed world, women found themselves thrust into roles traditionally reserved for men. The plague left vast voids, not only in population but also in societal roles, and women stepped forward, managing estates or family businesses in the absence of their husbands or brothers. This shift wasn't just from necessity, but gradually led to greater acceptance of women's capabilities. Guilds cracked open their doors, admitting women, particularly in industries such as textiles or brewing. While the patriarchal structures of medieval Europe remained formidable, women carved out spaces for themselves, setting the stage for later societal shifts. The rural economy, once tightly interwoven with tradition and serf-bound labour, had to adapt quickly to survive. Villages, their populations decimated, faced fields lying untended, nudging landlords toward innovation and flexibility. Some clung to remnants of serfdom, but many embraced tenant farming and sharecropping as viable alternatives. An industry began to sneak in through cottage craft and monetary trade, slowly diluting the rigid, land-based economy of old with the rudimentary whispers of capitalism. As society began restructuring, education, once the exclusive domain of nobility and clergy, started its descent into the hands of the commoner. The labour crisis spurred a curiosity for literacy and numeracy within burgeoning markets. Basic schools and apprenticeships sprouted cautiously, initiated by merchants and guilds seeking skilled labour to fill the gaps. While many resisted peasants wielding intellectual power, the gradual spread of basic education laid critical groundwork for a more informed, empowered populace, a slow-burning change that would kindle future enlightenment. In the shadows of societal upheaval, folk leaders emerged, rising from the ranks of those who had endured the plague's wrath. These figures resonated with communities, articulating the unspoken desires for change. Channeling the collective power of these fragmented groups, they broached negotiations for fairer treatment and laws. The narratives of these leaders, woven into local law, became a compass guiding future quests for rights and liberties, shaping the evolution of a Europe forever marked by the echoes of the Black Death. While the rise of the poor paved the way for unforeseen opportunities, it came with its share of hidden costs and struggles. Landowners, intent on regaining control, manipulated labourers caught between newfound freedoms and subtle exploitation. Contracts tipped against them, and unresolved disputes clouded future prospects. Yet despite these tribulations, the potential foundation for systemic change lay within these shifting dynamics. The post-plague world, with its newfound social structures, hinted at future revolutions. Seeds of societal transformation sprouting from the rich compost of desolation and survival. As the plague-ravaged land settled into eerie silence, survivors stood in a transformed world. The Black Death had begun as an uninvited spectre, tearing through Europe and leaving in its wake not just cities reduced to hushed tombs, but a rapidly changing social landscape. The plague had decimated the population and turned labour into a precious commodity. Fields lay barren, the workforce drastically thinned. Those who survived found themselves unexpectedly valuable, able to whisper demands that had, until then, been whispers swallowed by the wind. Discontent simmered among the living, whose newfound bargaining power threatened to tumble time-worn hierarchies like a castle of sand. In the aftermath of survival, it wasn't just the land left in disarray. Society itself found its foundations shaken. The old order, so long dominated by the iron grip of feudal lords, began to crack as the remaining peasants grasped the weight of their newfound power, a power to demand change, however tentatively. The air was heavy with potential. Those who worked the land sniffed at opportunities they hadn't dared to dream of before. The plague had planted seeds of revolt, their roots burrowing through the foundations of a society unwilling yet unprepared to face this rising tide. In England, the year 1381 marked a crescendo, the Peasants' Revolt. Villages once choked by despair now pulsed with defiance, led by figures like Wat Tyler. Anger over oppressive taxes and a rigid system boiled over. This was more than economic desperation. It was a raw, unyielding cry for justice. The Statute of Labourers tried to restrain the rising class by freezing wages, igniting fury instead. Villagers transformed into rebels, marching on London, their demands echoing like peals of thunder across the countryside. Though the revolt was quashed and its leaders silenced brutally, the sheer audacity of the attempt left a mark on England's muddied conscience. Across the Channel, France faced its own reckoning. In 1358, the Jacquerie roared to life as peasants, wearied by war and taxed to ruin, turned against a desensitized nobility. The rebellion, a spontaneous combustion rather than a deliberate strategy, tore through the French countryside, tearing away the veil of docility long draped over rural life. Though brutally suppressed, the Jacquerie exposed a raw nerve of peasant rage, leaving the nobility uneasy on their gilded thrones. These revolts, though crushed swiftly, revealed a shared desperation and determination for dignity, simple wants carved from the rock of medieval life. Beyond France and England, the whispers of rebellion found echoes in other lands, vibrating along the sinews of Europe's tense landscape. From Germany to Portugal, each revolt carried the pall of its local issues, yet all were connected by a common thread: the shared human experience of suffering, magnified by the plague. Although many revolts sputtered in the face of forceful repression, they nevertheless prompted lords and kings to reconsider their stewardship over people they had long dismissed. The spectacle of rebellion destabilized the rigid social strata, coaxing reluctant ears to listen to demands still whispered from the depths. In these uprisings, charismatic leaders like Tyler and Guillaume Cale emerged not only as rallying symbols, but as strategists who galvanized the oppressed toward a unified cause. Yet, while they inspired courage and action, they also faced the full brunt of repression, illuminating the treacherous road from grievance to action. Their brutal ends served as grim warnings, forever etching their stories into the annals of resistance. Yet like seeds carried by the wind, their legacies lingered, leaving behind questions and inducing reflection, even among their conquerors. The shadows of rebellion brought forth lessons in brutality. Armies unleashed on their fellow man reeked of iron and blood, silencing villages with savage efficiency. Leaders faced grisly ends to deter further dissent. Yet even as terror reigned, the spirit of rebellion simmered, mixing into legends told in murmurs over drinks. The cultural memory absorbed the very events meant to erase it, sowing the ground for future unrest where reform could take root over extended years. Communities constrained by feudal oversight and hampered by limited literacy still found ways to share aspirations and coordinate through whispers, ballads, and secret gatherings in inns and churches. These practices built networks of defiance, the silent threads binding those relegated to the margins. The iron fist of oppression may have contained the flames for a time, but it could not extinguish the embers. Women too played vital roles, moving beneath the radar of chronicled history. Despite the patriarchal blind spots, they organised, informed, and stoked the fires of change. Although their contributions went largely unrecorded, they formed the silent tendrils, holding the fabric of rebellion together. These unsung heroines ensured that the legacy of uprising was not just a chapter of masculine defiance, but a shared human endeavour. With the social order upheaved, economic shifts began to unfurl. Peasants and serfs, once bound to the land, began navigating pathways to economic freedom amidst a changing world. The persistent gnawing of the plague left feudalism frayed, gradually giving way to more fluid means of class, wealth, and mobility. Calls for autonomy resounded. A dialect that began in whispers, now promising a new dawn where stories of survival begot dreams of dignity. As the saga of revolt spins its last echoes, one thing remains clear: the language of rebellion, birthed in the crucible of calamity, extends beyond the mortality that threatened to silence it. It carries with it a testament to the indomitable will to rise, to speak, to reclaim. So as the sun dips below ancient battlements and history clicks over once more, let us linger upon this tale. Tales of peasants who dared to not only dream of change, but to demand it. If these stories stirred you in any way, don't just let them drift as tales of old. Give us a like, subscribe, and stay with Medieval Grime. We have many more tales to share, a little irreverent, always incisive. Until next time by the fire. Next. The Black Death's grim embrace left vast tracts of land barren, as heirs vanished alongside their noble kin. The relentless plague swept through the corridors of power, toppling the feudal strongholds that once seemed unbreakable. Estates previously bound by intricate feudal ties now lay desolate, their ownership up for grabs. This upheaval fueled the dreams of those who had long toiled as mere tenants. For centuries, land was synonymous with wealth, power, and privilege, but the plague rewrote the rules, opening doors to social mobility unseen in prior ages. In this twilight of feudalism, many surviving serfs took bold steps toward claiming newfound parcels of land, reshaping their destinies, and Europe's landscape forever. Nature itself adapted to this human retreat. Fields once vibrant with crops slowly surrendered to the wild, with forests creeping in and reclaiming what was once theirs. This shift not only redefined ecological boundaries but also nudged medieval farmers toward innovation. With new methods and more land available, the stage was set for agricultural experimentation. Greater crop diversity emerged, influencing local markets and trading lanes, laying early groundwork for a society that would slowly pivot from agrarian roots toward commerce and trade. Amid this transformation, the once mighty monasteries, bastions of learning and spiritual anchorage, felt the plague's bitter sting. Monastic communities dwindled, their echoing halls now empty of the solemn chants that had marked the rhythm of daily life. Many monasteries dwindled or disappeared entirely, their lands becoming ripe for secular interest to seize. Religious estates transitioned into the hands of secular rulers and traders, further shifting the power balance away from the church's grip. This decentralization of land and wealth loosened ecclesiastical ties, allowing a diverse social tapestry to weave itself anew. The loss of monastic guardianship over knowledge did create wider gaps in education, yet it was this void that saw secular universities begin to flourish, paving paths to the Renaissance. While these chaotic shifts brought about a precarious sense of uncertainty, they also carved pathways for intellectual, cultural, and economic rebirth. Perhaps even more dramatic was the erasure of entire noble lines, with death's scythe cutting through castles and courts without favour. Titles and lands often found themselves heirless, resulting in disputes, reshuffled territories, and the blooming of new alliances. Europa turned into a vast chessboard with altered allegiances in response to these power shifts. Amidst this dynastic disintegration, vibrant new families emerged, eager to seize the opportunity for influence, a fluidity that weakened the old feudal binds and saw central monarchies tilt the scales in their favour. As societal hierarchies wavered, new social classes began to arise, particularly within bustling urban centres where trade was painted with renewed vigour. Artisans and merchants found their crafts in demand, fueled by a spirit of entrepreneurship and innovation. The middle class swelled, voices growing bolder, sparking movements for greater civic liberties and political representation. Such shifts in wealth and influence ushered in a climate that cherished individuality, paving way to societal constructs that prioritized personal essence over noble stature. While nature cradled its reclaiming forests, cities found rebirth. Reduced populations became a crucible for new life and energy. Towns absorbed the hope of rural migrants seeking fresh starts, echoing with the clang of hammers and the whispers of markets reborn. This urban migration not only healed the scars of loss but fortified cities as hubs of innovation and cultural exchange. Yet these shifts seeded future discord. The fluid redistribution of wealth and land ownership sparked conflicts among rival factions, asserting the tumultuous roots of future European power struggles. The absence of legal frameworks to govern this sudden flux resulted in power clashes, while the swelling middle classes began to demand roles in shaping societal policies aligned with their newly claimed interests. Trading paths stretched out from these bustling centres, laying a nascent foundation for the colonial endeavours to come. As proto-banking systems sprouted alongside increased global trade, the tapestry of local economies was interwoven with a burgeoning capitalist ethos. Craft guilds flexed old rules into new possibilities, marking the rise of a proto-industrial social order. In the wake of this reshaped map, Europe stood on the threshold of economic transformation. Feudal structures began to crumble under the weight of newfound economic activities and redistributed lands, driving a wedge into the heart of rigid hierarchies. Serfs, now free to dictate their terms, mirrored the birth pangs of capitalism. The social imagination was stirred, fostering environments where wealth was crafted through innovation and commerce, rather than mere inheritance or conquest. As the old world crumbled, the groundwork for the Renaissance, Enlightenment, and subsequent economic revolutions was quietly, steadily set in motion across the fields and town squares of a plague-weary but resilient Europe. The Black Death sweeping across Europe left a profound silence in its wake, an eerie stillness that signalled both devastation and potential. Towns, once bustling with voices and life, were now hauntingly empty. The very land seemed to sigh with loss. Yet in this overwhelming silence lay the seeds for transformation. Fields lay fallow, bloodlines ended, and societies stripped to their foundations faced the daunting task of rebuilding. For those who survived, a new era loomed on the horizon, one that promised change and reawakening in nearly every facet of life. In the absence of the old order, creativity and intellect, once constrained by tradition, began to flourish. Survivors found themselves in a world where economic necessity and a shift in demographics demanded new approaches to living. Forgotten lanes, quiet and desolate, became pathways for innovation and reinvention. The emptiness, while echoing with sorrow, whispered opportunities to reconstruct and redefine their world. The redistribution of wealth following the plague was unparalleled. As vast numbers of the population perished, land and riches concentrated in the hands of the survivors, breaking the chains of entrenched hierarchies. This newfound wealth permeated society, especially in mercantile hubs like Florence and Venice, igniting a desire for art, science and culture. Merchants and craftsmen, previously tethered by fealty, found themselves wielding influence, supporting the vibrant tapestry of the Renaissance through patronage and investment. With this emergence of financial independence came other transformations as well. The lower classes discovered avenues to escape a life of servitude. They began to negotiate wages and seek opportunities that had been previously unimaginable. As these economic dynamics shifted, there was a ripple effect, one where the hunger for knowledge and cultural expression became palpable, moving relentlessly outward, inspiring change. The invention of the printing press around 1440 by Johannes Gutenberg revolutionized the dissemination of knowledge across Europe. Literacy, once the preserve of monasteries and the elite, expanded to embrace broader swathes of society as books became accessible. This democratization of information kindled a marketplace of ideas, where discussions and debates flourished beyond the confines of cloistered halls. Villages and towns buzzed with intellectual curiosity, sparking the humanism that would come to define the Renaissance. Such was the thirst for rediscovery that scholars turned avidly to the writings of antiquity. Renaissance humanism thrived on dusty texts preserved through generations, pulling Greek and Roman philosophies back into the light. Tales of yore found new footing as survivors, navigating a world of shadows, sought meaning in ancient wisdom. Books once lost or ignored now ignited fervour among thinkers eager to unravel mysteries from history to address their contemporary concerns. Artists stepped into this evolving cultural milieu as pivotal creators, crafting a new lens through which society might view itself. They blended inspiration from antiquity with fresh techniques to produce works both evocative and groundbreaking. Da Vinci, Michelangelo, and others bridged past and present, rendering the human condition with an honesty born of recent encounters with mortality. Art became an exploration of life itself, reflecting society's deep awareness of both beauty and transience. In tandem, architects seized the chance to sculpt urban landscapes anew. With cities both emptied and expanding, architects envisioned streets imbued with beauty, order, and purpose. The devastation of the plague became an opportunity to craft spaces that embodied a rejuvenated civic spirit. New methods and materials emerged, allowing for structures that symbolized resilience and hope, even as stone and mortar absorbed the echoes of a transformed populace. Amid these physical and intellectual reconstructions, science too rose from the plague's shadow. The apocalyptic crisis exposed medieval medicine's shortcomings, prompting scholars to seek more grounded understandings of the body. With taboos setting aside, dissection of cadavers became more widespread, inching medicine from the realm of superstition toward empirical pursuit. The anatomical insights garnered laid the groundwork for medical revolutions, marking the beginning of a shift towards scientific inquiry and discovery. As power and influence rebounded, political landscapes reshaped themselves. Traditional hierarchies crumbled, replaced by a mosaic of regional autonomy and negotiation. Monarchs and city-states found themselves recalibrating, dealing with merchants and artisans who now held power of their own. Florence, in particular, blossomed as a seat of wealth and creativity, driven by a fresh sense of civic pride and a more distributed power structure. This evolution paved the way for political and artistic revolutions, fueling a dynamic societal framework. In questioning old tenets, philosophers like Giovanni Pico della Mirandola opened new pathways of contemplation, challenging the very nature of fate and divinity. The aftermath of catastrophe incited Europeans to explore human potential from new angles, redirecting their focus from predetermined destinies to the empowerment of choice and agency. This philosophical shift accompanied mounting skepticism and laid the groundwork for the intellectual and scientific breakthroughs that followed. The aftermath of the Black Death offers a powerful testament to the resilience of human spirit and society. From the desolation left in plague's wake, arose a vibrant renaissance, an era of unprecedented creativity and reawakening. As old certainties fell, a new world emerged with an invigorated thirst for discovery. The Renaissance, born from despair, remains a profound reminder of the enduring capacity for renewal and transformation, echoing throughout history with lessons of human potential and ingenuity. The Black Death carved a deep scar into the soul of Europe, a scar that artists could not help but reflect in their work. This overwhelming dread of death permeated their creations, turning art into a medium for exploring mortality's ever-looming presence. The plague did not simply take lives, it transformed how life and its inevitable end was viewed. Artists mirrored this shift, portraying life as haunted by the spectre of death. Their canvases and sculptures were dark, introspective reflections, brimming with an eerie yet striking reminder of mortality. Out of this reflection emerged the danse macabre, or dance of death, a powerful symbol of the era's existential grappling. This artistic phenomenon depicted a motley ensemble: kings, peasants, clerics, and soldiers, all entwined in a grim waltz with death itself. These chilling tableaux conveyed a unified message. Death's grip was impartial, sparing no one, regardless of status. Whether on murals, in manuscripts, or performed as plays, the Danse Macabre did more than entertain. It instructed the living to lead virtuous lives, as death was always ready to call. The images of skeletal figures garnered as much attention for their whimsical eeriness as for their stark reminder of life's impermanence. In tandem with the Danse Macabre, memento mori arose, whispering to each individual a sobering truth: remember, you must die. Skulls, hourglasses, and wilting flowers became common symbols in art, marking the transient nature of life. These reminders were more than grim. They encouraged living life fully, yet thoughtfully. It was an era where art prodded individuals to contemplate existence and the afterlife continually. As these symbols of memento mori spread, they resonated profoundly, influencing how individuals approached each day, leaving an indelible imprint on the collective consciousness of Europe. Literature too took on a bleaker tone, as writers channeled the darkness they had witnessed into their works. Gone were the gallant tales of chivalry and romance, replaced by stories interlaced with cynicism and loss. Giovanni Boccaccio's The Decameron stands as a testament to this shift, weaving the horror of the plague with humour and insight. Such narratives delved into human resilience, revealing the absurd dance between life and unrelenting death. Writers became both jesters and judges, questioning societal norms and contemplating humanity's role in an unpredictable cosmos. Parallelly, visual art embraced the gruesome, with skeletons haunting scenes with haunting frequency. These skeletal figures were more than visual spectres. They embodied the blurred line between life and death, going beyond mere terror to become interlocutors with the living. They challenged the living to reflect on mortality's ever-present shadow. With their bony frames, these figures were storytellers without voices, inviting viewers into a dialogue about life's fleeting moments and moral implications. This evolution in art revealed how society reckoned with its fears, attempting to bridge the gap between the tangible and the transcendent. As the church struggled for authority in a post-plague world, artistic expressions of faith took on richer complexities. Religious art became a new arena for confronting doubt, fear, and divine questioning. Saints bore more human emotions, as artists endeavoured to bridge divine narratives with earthly realities. This nuanced portrayal resonated through gripping frescoes and solemn altarpieces, reflecting the broader struggle to reconcile faith with the staggering toll of the plague. Mortuary art, too, evolved under the shadow of the Black Death. Once serene, tomb sculptures transformed, becoming grim cadaver, effigies that portrayed death's inexorable reach. This stark visual representation was not an embrace of morbidity, but a contemplation of life's fragile brevity. These artworks urged society to confront death's equalizing power, serving as poignant reminders of humanity's earthly journey, melding the societal reflections of life and decay into art's enduring narrative. Architecture arose with its own tale to tell in this aftermath. Churches and civic buildings reflected a Gothic somberness, yet with an emerging Renaissance ambition. These structures symbolised endurance across stone and spire, offering silent testimony to survival, echoing through time with enduring whispers of collective grief. They told stories of mourning, but also of hope, aspiring skyward as reminders of humanity's resilience in a changed world. Despite it all, the Black Death's shadow ignited a paradoxical obsession with luxury amid decay. Society's newfound fascination with wealth manifested in extravagant textiles and opulent ceremonies, objects standing in sharp contrast to the grim realities of the time. These luxurious displays were more than vanity. They were assertions of identity and survival against uncertainty, transforming society's grief into an affirming dance with mortality. Through the art born in the wake of the plague, the era bears timeless witness to life's fragile dance with death. Art became the silent custodian of a period overwhelmed by loss, yet invigorated by the will to understand life's fragile nature. These creative reflections transcend time, exploring existential puzzles born from the plague's devastation, each stroke of the brush, every chisel upon stone, capturing the eternal dialogue of fear, hope, and the enduring spirit of humanity. The Black Death dealt a lethal blow to the structure of feudalism that had been Europe's backbone for centuries. Before the plague, life was dictated by rigid social hierarchies. Lords controlled the land while peasants worked it, bound to their roles. But as the plague swept through the continent, it decimated entire communities, leaving land abandoned and labourers scarce and essential. Landlords faced an unforeseen dilemma: adapt their terms to retain workers or watch their estates crumble. The surviving serfs, realising their newfound leverage, began to demand wages and better conditions, signalling the inevitable crumbling of the long-standing feudal system. This transformation was neither quick nor complete, dragging on across decades. Still, the forces unleashed by the Black Death changed Europe irreversibly. Some nobles clung to old traditions, but others adapted, offering land and freedom to attract workers. This shift sowed early seeds of capitalism as new markets emerged and trade opportunities grew. Economic power slowly drifted away from land-tied nobility, paving the way for wealth generation through trade and industry, a revolutionary shift heralding the end of the feudal era and the birth of something new. With feudalism's slow decline, cities like Florence, Venice, and Paris experienced a renaissance, reshaping Europe's political and cultural landscape. Many fled rural areas for urban centres, seeking stability amidst chaos, igniting growth in these cities. Merchants, artisans, and scholars, once peripheral, found themselves at the heart of urban governance and economies, turning cities into dynamic hubs of commerce and innovation. This urban revival not only boosted economic prosperity, but also upended medieval power dynamics. In these city-states, new ideas took root, and the stirrings of the Renaissance blossomed. People from diverse backgrounds mingled, exchanging ideas that catalyzed innovation in art, science, and politics. City-states refined systems of banking, governance, and education, becoming beacons of modernity. As their influence spread, they set the stage for the Renaissance's cultural and intellectual blossoming, which would propel Europe into the modern age. The plague also exposed medieval medicine's failings and questioned religious explanations for disease. Desperation spurred an early scientific awakening. Scholars and physicians, driven by necessity, began to question traditional beliefs, laying the foundation for an era of exploration and experimentation. In universities, scholars rediscovered ancient texts, sparking a renaissance in medical science and growing skepticism toward old doctrines. This thirst for knowledge transformed Europe's understanding of the world. Observation replaced superstition as the bedrock of knowledge. New tools and methods emerged, offering systematic insights into nature. The plague's terror ironically catalyzed an era-shaping transformation in thought, seeding scientific inquiry that would eventually kindle the Enlightenment's flame. In the plague's aftermath, Europe's trade routes evolved, reshaping economic practices and connecting territories like never before. The depopulation disrupted supply chains, but also created new opportunities. Merchants exploited market gaps, pioneering new routes and networks beyond traditional confines. As Europe recovered, trade boomed, exchanging diverse goods like metals, textiles, spices, and silk, setting the stage for the age of exploration. This interconnected trade fostered cultural exchanges, spreading ideas, technologies, and practices. Advances in navigation, cartography, and seafaring emerged, paving paths for explorers like Columbus. This burgeoning exploration opened global exchanges, reshaping societies on both sides of the Atlantic, fundamentally altering Europe's economic and cultural fabric. Artists grappling with the plague's devastation transformed how life and death were portrayed. Skeletal figures and macabre motifs reflecting shared trauma and stark realities infused art. The growth of macabre themes reached beyond art to literature and music. Society turned to creative arts for catharsis, grappling with existential questions thrust forward by the pandemic. This reflection on mortality ran parallel to a creativity renaissance. Artistic narratives expanded, embracing classical themes as Europe rediscovered ancient texts. City-states' financial prosperity enabled patronage, spawning iconic works by masters like Botticelli and Da Vinci. The plague drove art to evolve, mixing sombre with the sublime, morbid with magnificent, and embracing realism and exploration. Religious life was not immune to the Black Death's impact. Suffering and indiscriminate death tested the belief in a benevolent deity. As clerics fell, the church's authority waned. Disillusioned laypeople turned to personal spirituality and alternative expressions, prompting religious introspection and reform. This crisis sowed seeds for the Reformation, as leaders re-evaluated beliefs, hierarchical structures, and organisational purpose. In the wake of the plague, social bonds dissolved and new connections formed. Communities grappling with loss prioritised survival and cooperation, transcending old boundaries. This created a sense of shared humanity. Class barriers loosened as peasants negotiated better terms, altering rigid social strata. These new dynamics valued individual contributions, unleashing innovation and spreading ideologies. Europe's societal transformation encouraged civic engagement and responsibility. The social upheaval born of necessity, nudged society toward modern structures. As power centralization increased and governance adapted, the seeds of the modern state were planted. Feudal territories began transforming into defined nation-states with centralized governments, capable of managing resources, enforcing laws, and providing support. This restructuring birthed standardized taxation, bureaucratic administration, and legal reforms alongside emerging national identities. The concept of national identity, based on culture and language, rather than feudal allegiance, laid the foundation for modern political entities. In its grim harvest, the Black Death became an unintentional architect of modernity, dismantling old norms and pushing Europe toward growth, exploration, and innovation. The plague's terror, rather than stifling humanity, underscored resilience in reinvention. From medieval systems, new paths were forged, leading to profound transformations reaching well beyond Europe's borders. The legacy of the Black Death, though born in darkness, was one of renewal, aligning Europe's course toward extraordinary progress and uncharted futures.